Good morning, or now it's good afternoon. It is October 13th, approximately 1:40 in the afternoon. I am Venus Corbin-May. I'm not typing because due to my rheumatoid arthritis, my hand is hurting. So I'm going to videotape my commentary and then translate it into a document later on. Or transcribe it, have it transcribed. I am writing an account of 3 different situations where I had private meetings with administration that I now recognize may have been accusatory. So I will begin talking about the meeting on Friday with what caused the meeting on Friday, which was an incident with a student on Thursday biting someone, which was so that was Friday. I want to say last week was Friday, October 10th. The biting incident was the 9th. And then there was an incident on September 10th where the child eloped. And just like refusal. So that really was the predecessor to everything. I am Venus Corbin-May. I'm a special educator in the IRR community. I work at Fair Oaks Elementary. I've been there approximately since 2019. I guess that's 5 or 6 years. I've been an educator for 27 years. I've been in Cobb County since 2015. As an IRR teacher, that's the only position I've done in Cobb. However, this year I am an IRR teacher, but I'm also doing my first year teaching elementary small group. I did do small group once before, but it was in middle school and I was doing Sister 44 and Read 180. But this year we have Wonder, so it's a little different. And I've never done it in the elementary setting quite like this. I started the school year off with 10 special education students. In the co-taught class, there are 7 general education students. There is another our class on our level. There's a 2nd, 3rd grade class. That class has 4 students. The 10 students all need small group ELA. So that's why they're all in the one homeroom. And basically my schedule is we do math at 8:10. At, I believe that's 9:20, we start social studies. And at 10, I have them in ELA. Then we stop. They have specials at 10:55. We go back and pick them up 11:45. We have lunch at 12:02. So we have about 15 minutes. We do work. And then we leave there. Go to lunch at 12:02, pick them up at 32, and then we are there till recess at 1:40. And then we go to recess at 1:40, and then, of course, when recess is over, it's the end of the day. So that's our typical schedule, a daily schedule. So on Friday, I realized that there was a meeting on Friday. On Thursday afternoon, I received an email that says about 3 o'clock. I didn't see it until the evening or early morning. And it said that I had a meeting at 8 o'clock with the AP and the principal. I didn't really know what it was for, but since there was an incident where a student had bit someone, that student had previously eloped a few times, I thought it was possibly about setting up a positive behavior plan for that student. So I didn't know what it was about. The email is very, meet at 8 o'clock. So I went in the morning before I left. In the morning, I answered and just asked. I thought, what do I need? They told me I can bring my computer, and that was it. I arrived to the conference room. No one's there. I wait. Ms. Shires arrives first. I say good morning, decent greetings. Miss Seibert comes in maybe not too far behind. She kind of rushes into the room, and we kind of rushed to get started because they were a little later attending to some other things. Miss Seibert sits at the head of the table closest to the window. We're at a conference table. I'm next to her, kind of, cat a corner. She's at the head. I'm at the side. And Miss Shire sits on my right in the chair. I take a seat. I feel like a question was asked, and I'm not really sure what it was. And I was like, yeah, I didn't know what, this meeting was for. I just want to make sure was there anything else I needed to bring. She then says no, that I didn't need anything, and starts asking questions. So because Ms. Shives is to my right and the principal's to my left, I'm kind of more facing her. I don't really see Ms. Shives. So it begins with questioning like, do you provide your students with accommodations? So now I'm a little confused. I'm perplexed by that question. And I say, yes, I provide them with accommodations. Do you allow your read aloud students to get read aloud? And I say, yes, I allow my read aloud students to get read aloud. Byron has all ones on his assessments, and are you not providing him with his accommodations? Is that why? So it just so happens we had a math test coming up, and I already had it up on CTLS because that was the first thing. I didn't know the meeting was going to last till 10 o'clock, so I kind of had it up ready for my co-teacher since I normally lead math, and you'll see why I'm mentioning that in a few minutes. But I knew she could start off the test without me. I had already put in the accommodations. We already have our seating arrangement set. So be it. So I just because it was up, I opened my computer. I said, no, he gets it. I said, look, his name's here. He has the accommodation of read to. I said at one time, I used to try to do it small group it in a classroom because there's 10 of them. It actually gets more chaotic trying to bring 10 of them to my table, or even having 5 at a table when the classroom table, there's only 3 of them per table. I said, and it could have more space. So normally I'll just walk around and assist them, but I make sure everything is set up on their computers. Well, are you sure that Byron has it set up? I said, yes. I said, actually, I normally walk around and check computers just to make sure that every kid has it playing. It's just kind of my safe check. Well, did you not train them on how to do it? I said, no, I did. I said, but what I find is I'm always, I walk around during the test. So I try to make sure that every kid is listening. So, just in case they get up to another question, I'm like, just play it anyway or what have you. I said, and Byron is a student that I have to be mindful that he listens because often it feels like he finishes tests too fast. So then she says, well, is it that he doesn't know how to use it? Should I meet with him to train him on how to use the thing? And I said, no, I've trained them on it. I said, and Byron is very computer savvy. One of the reasons why I have to walk around is because Byron will be on a whole different application when he's supposed to be on a test. I said, so we have him sitting strategically where he is facing my co-teacher's desk or my desk when we're in the other room, so I can always see what's on the screen, even when I'm walking around the classroom. I said, so no, he knows how to do everything. I said, because he can do a lot on computers, actually. I said, I normally call him my technologist. Or I probably didn't even say that. That's what I do call him. So after she realizes that, I pretty much answered the questions, realign that. After I do the questions, she then shifts to what happened yesterday. And she's looking at me. I said, yeah, Carlos had an incident where he bit somebody. And she's like, no, that's what I'm talking about, what happened in Ms. Shire's office. So I'm going to go back to yesterday, or the 9th. So I'm going to say it was 11:45-ish because we were leaving specials. And the specials teacher, the kids walked by me. I actually was standing by the water fountain initially because they had already started coming out. My co-teacher was at the front of at the door, and I was standing so I could receive the students coming forward. And they're lined up there. But at the end of the line, the kids are all excited because they had made fossils. So, of course, everybody wants to show me their fossils. So I basically stand in the same spot so I can see everybody's fossils as they are walking by. My co-teacher walks by to lead them going down. At the end of the line, the STEM teacher is there, and she says, hey, I have Carlos, which is the name of the student that had bit somebody. I have Carlos's fossil. I said, oh, Carlos, who has it? And then, it's Jefferson or whoever had it. And I said, oh, okay, I'll make sure I put it on Carlos's desk when I get it from them and put it on his desk so he'll get it when he comes back to class. I said, because he's not in class right now. So now she's like, yeah, sometimes Carlos can be a challenge. Her daughter is actually in our class, and she's like, it feels like my daughter's getting frustrated with the fact that you have to, have to often give him redirections during lessons, so she feels like they're missing out on time. She's like, and I feel like that's a little frustrating. And I said, yeah, things are frustrating. I said, but right now, I said it can be frustrating. As I say, it can be frustrating because the water fountain is actually close to Miss Shire's office. I didn't realize she was in there because the lights were dim or off or down. I think she has a lamp or something in there. As I say that, Carlos comes running out of the room and he hugs me. So Miss Shire's is not far behind. And so when I see him, I realize what we were talking, and I'm like, is Carlos going to lunch with us? Really meaning, is he going back to class? But I said lunch. And she's like, hey, step in my office for a minute. So before I go in the door, I say, yeah, I do have to tell you, we had a parent-teacher conference with his mom. I said, we had it on Monday, and I didn't get to update you on what happened. I probably said that before that when when I asked, was he going back to lunch, she really didn't answer. And then I said something like, yeah, I had a conference with his mom. And I said, so I'll have to tell you about that later. Then she says, why don't you come in my office? So I don't know if she's going to ask me about the parent conference. I don't know, the incident. I don't know what's going to happen. So I walk in there. Now the class has already moved up the hall. They're like farther down by the nurse's office because I kind of peeked to see where they are. Like, let me run in here real quick, see where he's going to go, and then I'll go back to class because I had a review up on the board for my class. But a little 15 minutes, I try to get it all in. So when I walk inside the office, that's when I realized the lights were dim. And she might have had the blinds drawn. I don't even know. But the lights were dim. And she says, hey, Miss Corbin-May, Carlos was a good reader. He's been in here with me, at least, I guess, the last 20 minutes or what have you. He was with Miss Seibert, or he was in the office, but now he's been in here with me. And he read this book. He read it so lovely. I said, oh, yes. And I looked at him and he looked at me because the book that he was reading was a book he had just gotten, a similar book, part of a series. He's like, yeah, look. I said, yeah, Carlos, that's just like the book you got yesterday. She was like, yeah, I didn't know. And so we had a conversation about the book. She was asking that I want to hear him read it. And I was like, maybe later. I said, but I know you have the book there in the classroom. So now she's telling me about the book and how it's a series and how her son likes the book. And, how Carlos liked the book. I said, yeah, because he had, so we're just going back and forth about the book. Then she sits Carlos down she has like a hassock that she moves, I guess, from by the wall, and she puts it kind of in the center of the room. And then she kneels down next to him. And I'm kind of like, by that point, because the hassock is there, I've kind of moved back. When she was showing me the book, we went like to the left to her round table over by her desk. But then after she shows me the book, I kind of step like I'm going towards the door. Or at least like closer to the door. So she then kicks out the hassock and she kneels down next to him. He's sitting on the pillow hassock. And she's like, Carlos, what was Miss Corbin-May doing when you bit Emil? He says Miss Corbin-May was writing on the board. Did Miss Corbin-May see you? I don't know if she said bite or see Emil, get out of his seat. No, she was writing on the board. Did Miss Corbin-May see Emil take because then she says, well, what happened? So now he's explaining that Emil took a pillow from underneath him or from him, and that's when he bit Emil. So now I'm like, oh, I said, yes. I said, we were doing a review for the test. We were doing grammar. And, I had some worksheets for them to go over before we take our test tomorrow. I said, so I was writing words like bases or boxes or simple words on the board, and they were writing it on a paper. So at that point, I remember the grammar. I don't even remember that by that point we had moved to the review. Either way, by that point, I was writing even less because we were circling answers and things like that. So she asked him another question about, like, I guess, did I see anything? So now I start backing up because now I realize that the child is being interviewed in front of me. And I'm basically being, I feel like I'm being interrogated, but I'm not being asked any questions. So now I start backing up towards the door. I say, hey, maybe we should talk about this later. I was like, because I'm not understanding what's happening. I'm confused by what's happening right now. I said, I was writing at the board, but I was only writing short things. I said, everybody had the sheet, so we were working through the thing. I said, and I did see Emil with the pillow. I said, now it might have been when I turned to get something on the board because actually it was a problem with my computer. I said, so I turned. I said, but when I saw him with the pillow, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, I told him to put the pillow back. When I told him to put the pillow back, I had sent, everybody was on the carpet except for Carlos. Carlos was in the back on the carpet on some pillows when everybody was asked to be on the carpet where I was teaching a lesson. Everybody had a clipboard on the carpet. Carlos went all the way in the back. Asked Carlos to come to the carpet. He refused to move to the carpet. So now I'm kind of doing that, explaining. I said, then he sat in the back against the on the cushions all the way in the back. And then I was like, you know what? I don't want to spend a lot of time. I said, Carlos, as long as you keep doing the work, you can stay back there. So essentially I transitioned. So now I'm telling her, I said, but then when we transitioned to the next seat, because the kids had been on the carpet 10, 15 minutes, I then moved everybody back to their seat. I then asked Carlos to go to his regular seat, being that we weren't on the carpet anymore. However, Carlos refused to go back. I probably asked him 2, 3 times. I gave him the choice of sitting right there or whether he wanted to sit closer to me. However, he did not move. Emil is now sitting at his table, which is not on the carpet, but close to it. Carlos is sitting all the way at the back wall, which means his feet are at least 1.5 feet away from where Emil's seat is. Probably even bigger. Maybe it might be about 2 feet away. So he's sitting back. He's at his seat. We're doing the work. So it doesn't seem like it'll be a problem. So I'm trying to write on the board. Something happens. I have to click something on my screen. And in that time, Emil screams. And so it was odd because I had already asked Emil to put the pillow back. Now he screams. And I'm like, what happened? And Emil is like, he comes up. Of course, he comes running to me. He was already en route by the time I could even look up. And I see the bite ring on Emil's arm. And so I was already by my computer, by the desk, because I have to plug in that room. And so I called the office and explained that, Carlos had bit somebody, see what they wanted to do so I could get back to the review. So another assistant principal comes, Dr. Odom comes and gets Carlos. At first, he refuses to leave. She basically has to stand by the door, and then eventually he walks out while I keep teaching the lesson. So, all right. So that's what happened, or my take on what happened. But at this point, this is that incident happened. I want to say we go in there at 10 o'clock. We have specials at 10:55. So the bite, I don't really know what time because I was in the middle of teaching, but it was probably before 10:30. It probably was like 10:15, 10:20 because we had a short grammar, and then that. So, and then we were moving on. So it's probably like 10:15, 10:20, I'm assuming. So, when she starts asking him these questions, I become unnerved because I feel like I'm being accused of not watching him. And that's why it happened. When in the end, I was watching him and all I did was lean down to click I had to keep or discard or something like that. And it wouldn't work from the board. So I had to do it on the computer. Anyway, so I do that. I turn around. I put up the other document, and in that time, I tell Emil to put the pillow back. I guess when I tell him to do that, that's when he gets bitten. So even though Carlos was sitting back, now he's all the way by Emil. By the time I hit up the cry, I kind of look up from fixing the computer, and then Carlos is right close to Emil. So at that point, I'm like, hey. I was like, maybe we should talk about this later. What I realize is this Miss Shias takes offense to me saying, as I'm backing up, I'm like, maybe I should leave and we talk about this, at another time. I said, because I'm confused about what's happening. And I can hear and then I stopped myself. Then she said, don't say anything in front of a kid that you might regret or something like that. Don't say anything. Because at that point I was like, he bit someone. And I understand. I said, but this doesn't feel like, we're whatever. So I said, it doesn't feel like. And that's when she's like, hey, don't say anything in front of a kid that you might whatever. Meanwhile, I'm being interviewed in front of a kid and being caused to have to defend myself in front of a kid. But now I can't say anything. So now I back up against the door and I'm remembering that it's closed behind me. So she then kneels back down. She was standing at that time when she was like, hey, don't say anything. She kneels back down next to the student and she says, Carlos, you're a smart boy. And she says something like, Miss Corbin-May, don't you think Carlos is a smart boy? And I'm like, yes, Carlos is a very smart boy. I say, he's very wise. I said, and you can see that. I mean, just with how well he read the book and everything else. So she then says, so she stays in a kneeling position where she was standing at first. And she's like, Carlos, so what do you think? So what do you think about what happened or something like that? So now I'm like, hey, let me say this. I know Carlos is a very smart boy. So at this point, I'm by the door. I'm leaning against the door. And I'm crouching. I'm not kneeling next to him for some rheumatoid reasons. So I'm not kneeling, which I think is what she wanted me to do, was kind of come over and kneel. But I know what I can do. And so I crouched down, kind of leaning back against the door because he was on the hassock. So just so I could get his eye level. And I said, Carlos, I know how smart you are. I said, but honestly, I never would have expected for you to bite anybody. I said, you articulate and tell me what you think all the time. I know about your cats. I know about what you eat at dinner. I know all these things. I said, when you have to go, he drinks a lot of water. I said, you raise your hand or you let me know when you're hungry. I'm like, what happened yesterday when you were hungry? Miss Corbin-May went, got a granola bar out of her personal bag, handed it to you because you were hungry. I sent you to the nurse when you said you were hungry before that. When I knew you liked granola bars, I gave you one. When the granola bar wasn't enough, I still sent you back to the nurse. I said, when you want water, you raise your hand or you tell me you want water. If you need to go to the bathroom, you normally yell out because he kind of normally is explosive by the time he's going. Either and I'll remind you, raise your hand, and then you could go. I said, so you let me know all of that. I said, but when you get upset, you tell me nothing. I said, you never told me. You never said anything. The first sound I heard from that corner was Emil yelling because he was bitten. I said, you never told me that he took the pillow from you. I said, that pillow was on the side. The other pillows are kind of like flat pillows. One goes against the wall, one kind is flat on the floor. And this one was like a triangular pillow that was to the side. I said, I just assumed that he had picked it up from the side where I saw it earlier. I said, so, but he's not supposed to have the pillow at his table, which is why I recommended that he put it back, and he put it back immediately. I said, but I didn't realize it was underneath you like the way you told the story. I said, but, he wasn't not supposed to have the pillow. I said, but you also were not supposed to be in that area. You're supposed to be at your seat. I said, but since you were doing your work, I was like, you know what? Let me let you sit there. You're calm. You're collected. He had a very energetic morning. I had to work with him quite a few times, one-on-one. So since he was calm, I was like, let me just let it be. So anyway, after she does that kind of cool down where she's like, he's smart, I say what I have to say about him being smart, and just I want him to remember, not to meow like a cat or crawl like a cat or, all those things, because he's such an intelligent young boy. And whenever I'm trying to redirect, it's because I want him to be the intelligent young boy he is. And so now she looks at me, she smiles, and then she stands up. So at that point, I'm realizing now I've probably been in there 15, 20 minutes by the time this all elapses. And I'm like, okay, can I, I don't know if I asked her, could I go? And I was like, okay, well, is he going, it's back to, well, is he going to lunch? And then she told me, no, he wasn't going back to lunch, that he had to do something else and that he was going to eat lunch somewhere else. I said, okay, well, I'll just go back. That's when I realized how long I had been in there, because by the time I'm coming out, my class was already in the lunchroom. And I'm like maybe 5 minutes late to lunch, or, then I have to go get my lunch or what have you. So I leave for the day. I don't think anything of it. I received this email at 3:01 or 3:04, or whatever time it was. I see it probably in my box that I received the email when I come in from running errands about 6 p.m. But I read it in the morning. I respond. And so I respond, what do I need? So I just wanted to preface what happened before. So now I'm trying to explain all the things I just said, like what happened in the thing. So then the conversation turns to, you shouldn't say inappropriate things in front of a kid. So I'm like, what inappropriate thing did I say about a kid that would make them, because they were like, you'll make them feel bad. And I said, what did I say that would make him feel bad? Neither person replies. They don't say. They were like, but when you got flustered, when you started doing like, maybe I should come back, maybe I should leave, I was afraid the child might think that you didn't want to be with the child. And I said, no. I said, because when he saw me, he hugged me. I asked, was he going to lunch? I said, and I was flustered on 2 accounts. I said, I had 15 minutes before lunch to teach a lesson. I thought I was going to be in there for maybe a few minutes. Then the assistant principal says, well, since you were talking to or someone says, I can't even remember, I want to say it was, since I saw you talking to the STEM teacher, I just assumed you had time. That's why I called you into my office. I said, not exactly. I said, she was walking behind my class and we had a quick exchange. I said, and my class was actually right there. She says, well, I didn't see your class, which was true. By the time she made it out the office, they had moved, 25 feet. And the way the hallways are, she was facing me. Her back would have been to them. I said, well, they were right by the nurse's office when you came. I said, Miss McDonald was in the front by the nurses and they were there. And she's like, well, I didn't see them. I said, well, they were right there. I said, but, I thought I could quickly catch up to them. So she says, well, I just thought that he might feel some way about you saying you wanted to leave. I said, well, and then I stopped talking because I realized everything I said, there was a rebuttal for everything that I said. What I skipped was when we were having the conversation about the accommodations, there was a conversation about whether I provide my students, the 10 students, with what they need during math class, because the principal was like, you teach the lesson to the whole class. So how are you accommodating your student if you're the one that's teaching the main lesson? And I said, well, we both kind of swap out. If we realize a kid doesn't understand something, we may help. I said, but in general, I do like teaching that lesson. I was an elementary teacher longer than I've done special education. So anyway, or at least who knows how long now out of the 27 years. So I'm just like, yeah, I love teaching. Like, that's my favorite thing. Then the assistant principal like, yes, it's like your light bulb comes on and you look like you're electric when you're in front of them. I said, yeah, I enjoy it. I said, and I love being able to do the activities with them and what have you. And she says, well, he's failing. And I've seen on his data that he's failing. I said, I know. I said, I have the data up right here. So I pull up the data. I said, I've been looking at it, all week. And I was thinking about, what I was going to do about what I saw. I said, I know I have to do their goals, but I know they need to have this curriculum, have the standard curriculum. I said, so I'm always feeling like I'm in a quandary about which thing to do first. I said, but, I try to do what I can. So then she says, well, if you're teaching the main class or the tier 1, then how could you have time to work with the students? I said, well, we break them up in groups after that. Well, is Byron in your group? I said, no. I said, we split them because we had, we're actually down a student now, but we have 16, so we can have groups of 4. So I have 4 and 4, which makes 8. And Miss McDonald has 1 in one group and 1 in the other group. We had 3 because I had 10 at first. So I have 9. I think I'm right now. Now we have 16 total. So I said, so he actually has been working with Miss McDonald once we started small group in September. I said, but we're going to switch. We figure we switch again for the next quarter. So she's like, well, how do you meet his needs again? And she goes into how I shouldn't be teaching the lesson. Or she's like, I know it's team teaching, but you shouldn't have to stand in the front of the class and teach it. You should be pulling him to the side. Or I said, but I want to make sure he's getting exposure to it. If I pull him to the side while she's teaching, that doesn't work. I found that then they're not getting all the information. I said, and he's somebody who I have to sit strategically right in the front with one person beside him because, he has what he has and we're trying to keep him focused. I said, I constantly ask him questions while I'm up there because he gets normally what I'm talking about. It just doesn't always relay on paper or on tests. So she says, well, essentially, she says, I don't want you teaching the main lesson anymore. I would like you to do like do a video on CTLS, put it on so in the morning when he comes in, he can have a preview of the lesson or what have you, because we teach math first thing. Like we have the news, morning meeting, and I teach math. We teach math straight away. So there really isn't like a lot of time for pre-teaching, at least not for the group of them. And I went on to say, I said, it's Byron, Valentine, and Ismail. I said, and then we have some few Rockies. I said, but a lot of them don't come until late. So I tend not to pull them as a group. They don't come in on time. They come late or they're definitely not there, or they're coming in during the news. I said, so I rarely pull them. So I'd rather do it as a whole group when they're all there. She then says, well, nevertheless, kind of like, I still want you not to teach it. You need to figure out how to pre-teach all the information before class so that he can get it so he's not failing math. And I said, I understand. I'll take that. I wrote down that suggestion. I also said, well, would you rather me teach him, test him individually and change his IEP that has individual, tested, because maybe that's what he needs. And she was like, oh, no, 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 that's not what he needs. He doesn't need that. I just wanted to know if you were giving him his accommodations. She said, because when I interviewed him, because I needed to do an investigation, I asked him and he said no. And I think I told you guys that part of the story already. So then she asked about the ELA. So by then she notices, like I'm telling her, I said, it is a challenge as an IRR teacher to make sure they're getting everything they need from the main curriculum and that they have practice to do it, and make sure that I get their goals met and meet with them in small group, etc. I said, so I try to squeeze it in, especially their individual goals as much as possible. But since they're being assessed on these standardized things, I try to make sure I give them the practice in that most of all. And I squeeze in, getting them to their goals, or I use the teacher tables, which is like or their workbooks to kind of, double dip if I can. So she says, yes, I understand. She was like, but research shows that, the more they're introduced to the tier 1 information, the better off they do. I think she said it was like a standard deviation of 2.5 versus 1.4. If you just kind of meet them where they are, you don't want kids to feel like they're less than or stupid if you just give them low level stuff. And I said, yes, that's why I felt like I wanted to teach that. I said, now in ELA, it's a different thing. So I think then she started asking me about ELA. And she's like, well, the district spent a lot of money on Wonders. So you need to make sure that you teach all the tier 1 stuff. I said, well, yes. I said, that has been more of a challenge because I realized I have students in that group that many of them didn't know all their sounds and letters. And many of them had poor handwriting skills and spelling skills, that even when I first tried to just do what everybody else was doing, I couldn't even read what they were writing. They couldn't read the instructions, that I'm going to read to them anyway, but they just didn't understand. I said, so then I was like, she had sent me for a training. I said, so since you sent me for that training for Orton Gillingham, and there was so many that needed help with blending and segmenting and, letter formation and whatever, I said, I began the year with that. I said, and I was just talking with Mr. Cooper the other day about how I'm going to stop doing that to make sure that they're getting everything everybody else is getting. And then we'll make sure in small group, because so many of them have improved, like specifically the boy Byron. At the beginning of the year when I did his data, he had 2 out of 10 that he could read of CVC, or, kind of blends, digraphs, CVC kind of words. So at most 4 letters. He only could read 2, and it took him over 3 minutes to read 10 words. But when I tested him last, he read 8 out of 10, and he did it in less than a minute. So I felt like what I was doing was working. I was like, since I got the ball rolling with most of them, even my non-readers, they're just, moving. So I was like, I feel like now I can change what I was doing. And she was like, yeah. She was like, I didn't send you to a training last year. I said, no, you sent me during the summer. And she was like, you need to be doing the tier 1 stuff that's in Wonders. I said, yes. At first, I was trying to do the phonics with the rest of the grade level because we were doing the phonics that was in Wonders. I said, but the students had difficulty with it, and that's what made me jump back. She says, well, we're not doing the phonics from Wonders anymore. We're doing the CTLS lessons. I said, yes. I know they went to the CTLS lessons, but I really wanted in quarter 1 to give them this base with handwriting, with the letter sounds, with whatever. I said I didn't get as far in the program because 3rd grade has taken Beacon and Iowa, and now, just all these tests that I thought I would have gotten all 30 of these lessons or 28 of these lessons done before quarter 2, and then I would have moved into what everybody else was doing. I said, but I always feel bad that the students are not seeing everything everybody else is seeing. I said, but there's not time in the day to meet their needs and whatever. So then she's like, yeah, you really can't. I really need them to be exposed to tier 1. and not worry so much about that. Make sure that you teach them, what everybody else is doing. I said, I understand. I said, Mr. Cooper and I have tried a few times. I said, but what happens is when I do everything that everybody else is doing, they end up needing a lot more support. And then we were not having time to do small groups. I said, so then I tried to figure out how could I trim what I was doing. Give them the phonics they need. Give them the spelling practice they need. Give them the sight words because most of them can't even write pre-primer, all the pre-primer sight words. Actually, they can do maybe 10 of them. And so, I wanted to give them some time to kind of catch up while I still did the reading. She's like, well, you're not supposed to be doing it. I said, no. I said, I do the grammar that everybody else does. I do the reading. Whatever the reading is, I do the entire reading lesson. She then says, well, you realize that you need to scaffold them. I say, yes. I said, initially what I was doing was I was using all the scaffolding techniques on wonders. But when I did that, it took even longer because I want to make sure. And I said, I still do it because they need the vocabulary. They need the background. I said before, and that's just good teaching. You do that before. I said, but I like to practice the vocabulary with them every day. I said, I even have them clap when we hit the word or whatever. I said, because I know that they need the grade level vocabulary, even though they may not be able to read every word on their own. I said, sometimes Mr. Cooper and I'll do it up on the board in the front. I said, and sometimes Mr. Cooper and I will split it and we'll parallel teach whatever the story is. I said, depending on if he's in there or, what have you, whatever the activity is. I said, like the other week, the story was extremely long. So we actually parallel taught that one because I figured with a group of 5, being that there was 10, it would be better. We get more bang for our buck. So she says, well, I just need you not to do the phonics. I said, that's fine. I said, I'll go just begin doing more of what everybody else is doing. I said, in between last week and this week, I said, my team, everybody's frazzled because some of the things that our report card says is not in wonders. I said, so now we're trying to do all these assessments to assess what we've taught the kids or what needed to be on a report card. I said, and if I do all the assessments, then I'm not getting to the wonders because my kids need more time. I'm reading them aloud or they're taking them online, So I said, it just takes so much time. I feel like I can't get to everything. So the AP then says, yeah, it feels like you're burning your candle at both ends. I said, yes. I said, and that has become frustrating. I said, I feel like I'm always asking somebody, like, how are you getting this done? And what are you doing? And I'm asking Mr. Cooper as the ESOL teacher, what's the best way? How do you think we're doing it? I said, and we were trying to figure out how to trim it together. I said, so I try to do as much as I can before he comes in so I know we have the most bang for our buck with small group. So I was like, okay. So at that point, I feel like it's settled. And that's when she asked me about what happened with Miss Shires in her office the day before. But the point of all of that I'm saying is the math conversation, she told me not to teach tier 1. The ELA conversation was teach tier 1. So now when I'm in a conversation, I'm like, I just want to know what the district wants the small group teachers to do. I said, because there have been no directives from the district about what the small teachers should do. I said, we didn't even get a kit. We didn't even get TEs. They told us to use the online platform, which is very comprehensive, which, of course, by now I figured out how to find everything. I said, and even we went to the specialized training because we're a transformational school, and they were using it. And I said, I had to ask the presenter, like, you're telling me tab this page and tab that page. But online, I don't even know how to use this platform to tab. In the end, there was no way to tab. But even the lady who was presenting, who came over to help, got flustered when she realized that this document, that's one book in front of them, is actually 3 different documents online. And the pages is not in order. So the first book is this and the next book is that. So anyway, but I just wanted to know how I could mark it so I could earmark it, get back to it, and not be confused. So I said, I'm supposed to share the kit with my co-teacher. I said, but we're both teaching ELA at the same time. So I said, so sometimes I said, because I knew I had the Orton Gillingham, that was the way I kind of started. And I was like, because initially it was said that we probably would get a kit. So I thought that it would have come and then I would have moved back. But, I heard from the special ed department when they came to our school near the beginning of school that we weren't going to get them. But then I know Mr. Griffin and the other AP, Dr. Odom, said they were going to try to get it so that at least in the small group room, we would have all the kits so we could use out of, especially with the small group books, we could be able to go like from K to 1 or what have you. So I said I was looking forward to it, but in the end, we're in the 9th week of school and, so I'm using what I have. So then she says, oh, you didn't articulate you didn't no I said it sometimes, and then they said, I said sometimes that might be why I think she said you look frustrated. Somewhere in there that came up. And I said, yes, sometimes it can be a little frustrating with just trying. I really, as a teacher, am trying to make sure that their goals are met. But I'm also knowing that they're being assessed on all these different standards. I said, math is simple. The ELA standards are immense. I said, and my students, if they do it in a day, sometimes I need 2 days to do that assignment. I said, so get into everything. And now they're realizing that this wasn't covered. So now they're adding in other lessons that need to be covered basically before today, that we have to cover and get these grades for. I said, today they have assessments all day because we have a final math test. They have the final ELA test and they have a grammar test today. I said, and I don't even know if they're going to get to all of it today because depending on how long they need. She then says, well, honestly, you need to be, in ELA, and I'm just putting that in parentheses, you need to make sure that they're seeing everything. And I said, I understand. I said, I just want to know when we went to the meeting last week for the transformational, I said, I actually felt more comfortable. I said, because they were telling us that we could flex the times based on the kids and not feel like everything had to be done. And I said I had started speaking to Mr. Cooper about how I was going to change the lessons for next week because I want to make sure we have the phonics. I want to make sure, because that's what they need, that they have the grammar because their sentence structure needs assistance. But I want to make sure they have the comprehension. So I'm listed off that. And she's like, well, you just need to follow the curriculum as stated in the thing. In our curriculum, you need to give them CTLS phonics lessons. I said, and I did try that at first, but they were so lost because they didn't even know B from D and P from Q and R from A. I went back to what I knew they probably needed. And then she then said, like, well, is it that you don't think they can ever get it? I said, no. I said, that's why I teach the rest of the stuff the same as everybody else. But I know if I don't get them to the point where they know the letters and the sounds and they're not, it's going to prevent them from reading. I said, they're already in 3rd grade. I said, some of them came to me and they can't write their first and last names correct. I said, out of the 10 of them there, I had 7 of them that they could not write their first and last name. I said, so I was really trying to use this quarter to make sure they can write their first and last name, that we knew all the letter and letter sounds. We were still blending and segmenting words. We were still doing comprehension. We were reading books. We were still, working on sight words. And so then I think that's when she goes and starts talking about what they need and how they need it. And it just proved to be a situation where I felt like I was defending my teaching. I know I've been at that school a few years. The same thing that I'm frustrated over this year, I'm always frustrated over since I've been at Fair Oaks. I've had students that in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, because I've taught all 3 of those grades, still didn't know how to write their first and last name, couldn't spell words like cat or dog. So this was not the first time, and I'm in 3rd grade. At least when I was in 5th, it was kind of a harder thing, or 4th, like that they didn't know. But, I wanted to be able to give them that leg up, and I've had success with my students. I had one student the year before she was a BR and she went up to a 500. I mean, so I've had success with students doing what I'm doing, making sure they get the basics while they're being exposed to what everybody else is being exposed. So I really was trying to do a new thing, but because this is a new curriculum, it was a little harder for me to figure out what do I trim. Because the stories are longer than what we would have typically done when we used to make up the lessons. But anyway, so by the time we go through that, we go through what happens in her office, I really realized that, she set out that she investigated the thing with the boy from the beginning. I just didn't realize that all of this was an investigation. And I realized, like, oh, that's why you were asking the questions you asked of me yesterday. And you were asking it that way because you were investigating me yesterday. And so we get to rest in the conversation, and I'm trying to remember what was said, because by then I'm in tears. I'm like, I don't know what to do. If you just tell me what you want me to teach them, like you're telling me now, I will do whatever it is you ask me. I said, but I recognize that these kids are suffering because they don't have the foundations, and then we keep trying to pile these new things on top. She then stops and starts explaining how she has a learning disability and how it's her superpower and this and this and this and this and that, which kind of, I know she has a disability. She has ADHD. She's done whole TED Talks about it, or Cobb Talks about it. And she's always referring to the fact that she was dyslexic, learned how to read as an adult. So when she finishes telling me about it, which was, she was passionate about what she was saying, and I understood. I shook her head and I said, did you know I didn't learn to read till I was in 3rd grade? I said, so we're both passionate about this, but I know had I not gotten the foundations, that was the difference for me. When I learned those key cues, I went from being a student. Now, I didn't qualify for special education, but that was due to not passing the intelligence part or not failing it, whichever way that went at that time, talking in the 80s. But I did not know my letters. I could not write my letters. I couldn't, I had the same thing. I said, and even numbers, I have to be careful with them now because that's still, I'm good at math, but I can, if you read off a number, I may mix them up. I said, so I understand. I said, so when you're telling me this, when I say I feel what you're saying, I do, because I was that student too. The only difference is I didn't get help because I wasn't a special education student. I just had to figure it out on my own, and my parent tried to do the best they could because the teachers weren't going to teach it to me, and I didn't have anybody to, I wasn't special education. I said, so I understand. And by then I'm saying it, but I'm crying profusely. And so then she stops and she says, well, what's making you upset? And I said, well, I guess because I was crying, now she stops talking. And now she's like, I said, well, I understand that we are both passionate about this. I said, and I also understand you had a disability, but so did I. I said, so we both want to do what's right by kids. I said, but it doesn't feel like you think I'm doing what's right by kids. And she says, well, what would make you say that? I said, well, you said you were interviewing students to see. And then I stopped myself because I realized anything I say may and can be used against me. I don't know if they were recording. I don't know. I said, but after you gave me the whole litany about you being special education and the research, I felt like I must not know anything and that I must be doing all the wrong things. So now I guess because I'm crying, the AP hands me over the tissue box. I grab a tissue. And then she says, yeah, but it's not just that. She says, the other day I came to your room. So on Tuesday, previously we were told that we have CCCs in the morning at 7:15. The kids go to the cafeteria. So on that Tuesday and that Thursday, which I guess that was the Ninth and 7th, we were told we wouldn't have kids in the morning. And I confirmed it with my co-teacher. She's like, no, we're not supposed to. They're supposed to go to the cafeteria while we prepare for report cards. So we're in the room. We were supposed to have a parent conference. The parent didn't show. The kid comes like right at 7, after 7:15. So we realized we may not be able to do it because it was supposed to be a 7 o'clock appointment. So we were in the room, one at first waiting for the parent, but then setting up. So about, I don't know what time it was because I really wasn't paying attention. Maybe it's 7:27, the assistant principal comes in and she says, oh my, your class was lined up so nice outside. You're supposed to have the kids in the room. And we're like, oh no, I can't believe it. I thought they said we had time for report cards. This is Tuesday. That was Thursday. We just mixed up because we had the parent conference. It threw us off, whatever. So she's like, so as she opens the door, she lets them in. She's like, don't worry, the kids are coming in. I'm by my desk. I just say good. She's talking to Miss McDonald. She's talking to the other co-teacher. I'm greeting all the students as they come in because now those two are talking. She's saying, like, don't worry about it. I greet every student. And I'm like, hey, good morning, such and such. How was your night? What you eat for dinner? When the kids all come in and she's talking about how well they were behaved, I said, no worries. I'm going to give them some points. She said, I feel like they need something more than that. Because by now I'm walking towards the students. I left where my desk is. My desk is on the opposite end of the room. So I get closer to the door after I greet everybody. And I said, oh, I just need to go home and come on back. So I basically walk out the door because I'm by the door. I'm actually right behind her. She's like a foot away from the door. I say that and I pause because she had said something to me or she was talking to the both of us. And so I walk out the door and I walk back in the door. So this is what happens on Tuesday. But now in this meeting, she brings up that I said I wanted to leave and go home. But when she says it, it throws me off because I was like, she was standing right next to me. Did she not hear me say that like a euphemism? Because when I said it, Miss McDonald and I were giggling. Like, I'm going to leave and go home and I'm going to come back. And then I just kind of went out the door and came right back in. And so she says, yes, kids could take that wrong, like you don't want to be with them. It's like you're saying things to make kids think that you don't want to be here at school. And by then, I don't say anything because I know what I said and I know that's not how I meant it. There were actually no students by the door. I actually peeked out the door before I even said it because I kind of mumbled it underneath my breath like, I'm going to go back home and come on back in because she was standing right by the door. It was just a conversation between she and I because we were just giggling about oh my God, I can't believe we did it. I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to start this day over is how I started. And we were just laughing. And then I said, all right, I'm going to go back home and come back in. So I went out the door. I came back in. And then she was like, Miss Corbin-May, you shouldn't feel like that. You shouldn't feel like you want to go home. But now I'm confused by her statement because I'm like, yeah, I'm resetting my day. And she's like, yeah, you need to start each day thinking it's a positive day and it's a great day. But I don't realize that she is trying to make it sound like I was being negative about being at work. Not that I was joking about starting my day again. But the way she says it to the principal is like, that's what she said. And then it was right in front of the kids. And they could think that she doesn't want to be with them. I wouldn't want any kid to feel that way. She was like, Miss Corbin-May, you have children. How would you feel if your kid's teacher said that in front of them? But now I'm like, but I didn't say it in front of the kids. Yes, they were in the room, but I was mumbling it and you were right next to me and no kid was by the door. And I also understood that's not what I meant, but I knew no matter what I said, there was going to be a comeback for it. And I just recognize when people want to get you, they will. They will find any reason, even no matter what I was trying to say. So at that point, when that comes up, I think at that time, I'm already crying. I'm just silent. That's when it turns into, well, how can we support you? Because I see that you're upset. You haven't communicated these frustrations to anybody. So now I straighten up and I'm like, what haven't I communicated? I said, I think I've communicated very well. I said, when I realized I had 10 students and the other co-teacher had 3 or 4, I went to my special ed supervisor and had a conversation. When I realized once they finalized the schedule that I had 6 transitions rather than 2, when I know I had 2 students that have, can be very excitable. They're not the only ones that may become unfocused very easily, but I had 2 in particular. I was concerned about the schedule. I said I went straight to my SSA, talked to him about the scheduling and how we could possibly change it so that my schedule mirrored Mr. Erickson so that I would only have some students part of the day and not all 10 at one time. I said, I didn't even come with just the problem. I went with the solution. Like if we switched to match somebody, I said, because I would prefer to have the 120 block all together in one thing so I could roll it freely. Because what happens is when we make the transitions, now they got to go to the bathroom. Now they want water first. If we're coming from gym, now they want water in bathroom. So I'm losing time. When they come back from lunch, just water in bathroom. I said, so we lose time every time we make a transition. And they lose their pace. Like when I finally feel like I get them going, we have to leave. And I said, and then when it didn't seem like Mr. Griffin, he told me or whatever, that he wasn't in charge of schedules. He said he would go and talk to somebody about it. I kind of let it lie for a week or 2. But then one day, Miss Shires came to me and she asked me, like, what do I think would make the small group better? She had come in, I think, and observed, and she was talking about how I was doing the OG, and she liked how I used the methods and this and that. And I said, what I really would like is if our 120 block was all together. Now, I wish I paid attention to the dates in which I did this, but all of this was in August. This was before. This was before I probably started pulling them out the week of August 20th to go to the small group room. And then I started the small groups the first week or after Labor Day. So all of this kind of happens, especially with my schedule and knowing I had the 10. That's before I pull them out. And I probably speak to Miss Shires the first week when I pull them out, because now since I'm pulling them out, so it's like I pull them at 10. Now we got to join back with the rest of the class to go to specials. Now we got to separate them out for the 15 minutes before lunch. Then we got to put them back together to put them before lunch. Then when we come from lunch, then we got to separate again for the last, I guess that's like hour that we're together. It was about an hour that we're together for reading. And so I'm like, it's just a lot of transitions and a lot of breaks in, learning. I said, so I remember I was standing by the door. I stepped outside the door to have that conversation with her because I'll schedule up. And I was like, yeah, that's probably something that would help so that I don't have all the transitions, especially with students like the 2 that she interviewed, because every time you make a transition, you have to settle them again. You got to get them refocused, whatever. So I said, so I did talk about the schedule to both the SSA and to Ms. Shires, the AP who was next to me. I said the other thing I brought up was the fact that I didn't have the supplies for the unit. And even though they did a training with the special education department, it was basically we had training more about compliance issues, and then they had a training on wonders, but it was more about like what was in the kit. But the issue, of course, is I'm IRR, but I'm actually small group for reading, so I'm not in the classroom to share the kit with the teacher. I said, so honestly, I've kind of taken certain things out the kit. I borrowed a TE from Miss Dehigo, who is one of our instructional specialists. I said, the instructional specialists have teacher editions, but the special education teachers don't have any of it. I said, and I'm trying to figure out how to use this program while using a computer, but when it glitches, when it does this, that's time off task, and then I have to redirect students. And I said, sometimes you just want something easy that you could just use, and if technology wants to be ugly, you could just keep it seamless. So she says, well, you didn't articulate. I said, no. I said, the first or second week of school, when I realized that we didn't have it, I said, I remember because I was with the special ed team and I was asking, were we going to get the kits and stuff? Because there was like rumors that we might get it and this and that. I said, I hear online we might get it. Miss Hybrid, are we going to get it? And you were like, no, we don't have the money in the budget. We would have to, you would have to use the SPED budget, or I guess there was no other way. But the SPED, I said, yeah, but the SPED department said they're not going to be able to do it. I said, because I just happened to run into one of the SPED people. They had come to our school for a meeting or something. And I said, yeah, she was like, the odds are they're not going to purchase it. And I was like, so if we rating on that, I said, well, then you know what? I'll use what I have, which is what I've been doing. And so then I said, and the next thing I asked for, or I was concerned about, so was the schedule. It was having the tools. I said, I asked for a PD day to help me figure out some of this stuff, as well as I had really done it for the whole special ed team because I'm the special education lead. So when I'm going to her about having the curriculum or having all those things, I'm going on behalf of the whole team. So I said, we asked for a PD day because a lot of times when we've had to do our progress reports, grades were not due Friday, progress reports due Friday, and then we're having conferences the following week. Sometimes there's a few days time. So I had asked, could everybody I had mentioned having a PD day, and Miss Saba was like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll put money to the side. Just work with Mr. Griffin to set up the schedule. So when we had our last special ed meeting, I brought it up. I had sent an email maybe a few days before. That way, if he needed to, however it needed to be set up, he'd be able to tell us at the SPED meeting. So when we get to the SPED meeting, he asked us, he said they had enough for us to do half days each quarter, that he will get back to us with an email asking us when we wanted the PD day to be. And so I then, not last week, and I don't remember which day he emailed us, but it was early the week before, let's say Monday or Sunday night in his news and notes, or maybe it was Tuesday. He asked what day that week we would want to have our PD. I said Thursday morning. That way I could do it from 8 to 10. My co-teacher can do math and social studies. And if the sub is there, they'll be there to assist. And then I can get some of my data points in and all those things into Synergy. I said, but it never happened. She then stops and says, well, you were supposed to put it in. I said, well, he sent an email asking for us which day. I said, and a lot of times when the school does the PD, you guys tell us what to do. Like you do the forms for us. I said, so I didn't know I was supposed to put it in. I said, I don't think the rest of the SPED team knew either. I said, because I know I didn't tell them. I said, but now it's Friday morning. They were due. I've already completed them. I said, so those were the three main things that I discussed. I said, and there was a fourth thing. I said, but I basically asked the teacher. I said, the fourth was when I realized that my co-teacher only had 7 left in the classroom and I had 10, the ESOL teacher was coming to her for an hour. And I basically asked, could he come to me with the 10? Because being that he was coming during ELA, I'm not ESOL certified. The kids would not get served in ESOL and ELA. They would, so I was like, if I have them by myself, they won't get served. So can he come to me even half the time and do a group or whatever? I said, but I didn't even bring that to you guys because the intervention leader on our grade was in charge of scheduling. So I spoke with Mr. Cooper first, just because he had come to our room, and I was like, I'm concerned if once I take them out, you'll be in here when they're not in here, and I'm not in here. So anyway, that problem, he spoke with Mr. Higo, who's our 3rd grade interventionist, and they were able to change the schedule so he can go into Miss McDonald, but primarily he could stay with me, which was great. So we've been pretty much working since the 2nd week we had small group, which is like the beginning of September. So the only other incident that needs to be discussed is the elopement that happened on, if it's October 10th, September 10th. I'm going to start at the beginning of the day. I may have told you part of what happened in the video, but I'm going to make sure I'm covering everything again. So on that Wednesday morning, during math, Carlos is upset. He's kind of meowing. His head is down. He's like crisscross applesauce, but his head is like in his lap and he's looking up at me. But he often does kind of cat-like motion. So I'm like, Carlos, what's going on? My co-teacher takes over doing the opener to the lesson. I take him out and I talk to him, and he's telling me how somebody told him his stuffed animal was fake, and so he was upset by it. And I said, oh, no, don't feel that way. I said, so she's asking me, is it fake? I said, you know what? I don't know this toy. I said, Miss Corbin-May's kids are teenagers and young adults. I have no idea. I said, but I assume I see the tag. I don't even know what the name is. So he tells me it's a boo-boo-loo-boo or whatever. And, you know, his friend had gotten it for him, or he got it, or he had gotten it from somewhere. And I said, well, don't worry. I said, do you like this boo-boo-loo-boo or whatever I called it? And he said, yes. I said, well, as long as you love it and it's okay, you should keep it in your book bag and you know, take it out at recess. I said, but don't be upset about that. If you like it, I love it. You shouldn't worry about that because I don't know what's real and fake, and you probably don't either. So we gonna love what we love. So he seems contented. He goes back to class. He acts like he's putting it in his book bag, but in the end, he put it in his, he had a sweatshirt with a zipper pocket in the front. So it was in there. How do I know? So in the middle of the math, he starts yelling out and crying. Evidently, with him playing with it in the pocket, he ripped the back of the, like the seam on the neck of the teddy bear or the head. So he's upset about it. Now, really, he wants me to take him back outside and talk, but now I'm in the middle of teaching a math lesson. I tell him, I say, hey, why don't you put it in your book bag and maybe your mom could fix it? So he yells out more, and I say, you know what? Sometimes Miss Corbin may have a way to fix it. He says, but I need a piece of tape. I said, I could give you a piece of tape. I said, but it won't hold because it's furry. You really need a needle and thread. I said, but I'll see what I can do. I said, but just put it back in your book bag for now, and we'll figure it out later on. I said, I may have something I could fix it because I thought I had some safety pins in the back or a sewing kit. So, but because I was in the front of the classroom teaching, I didn't want to grab it right then to fix his teddy bear. I was like, she's in the middle of teaching, I'm in the middle of teaching. Let's finish this lesson, and then when it's time for small group, I'll be back by my desk and I'll look and see if I have it. Well, suffice it to say, he's still upset about it. So we do math, we do social studies, because maybe it's during social studies that it rips. So it's a good minute. We go out to my class. Now, at this point, I'm still thinking the thing is, because now once I know it's ripped, now I'm like, please put it in your book bag. Leave it in there till later. I don't want it to get any more damaged. You know, he had found a piece of tape somewhere, put it on there. I said, just leave it in there for now. I said, and if I can have a way to fix it, but I probably won't be able to do it till the end of the day. Because I said, your second load, right? He's like, yeah. I said, so I'll check by then. I'll be able to check by then to see if I have something that can help. I said, but otherwise, just make sure you tell mom, you know, so she can help you out. So now it's almost 10 o'clock. It's time to line up to go to the small group room, which is diagonal to the hall. It's just, you know, maybe 50 feet away. I take him into the classroom. The whole group in the classroom. There's 10 of them, I think, at the time. Bring them in. Everybody settle in. They know they do their orange folder first while I'm reconnecting my computer and getting everything set. They put their baskets on the table because the classroom's a shared room. And he refuses to sit in his seat. He wants to lay on the carpet. He wants to lay out on the carpet. And I'm like, Carlos, what's wrong? Go ahead to your spot. We're going to get started soon. But my bear. And I said, well, the bear, don't worry about it. You put it in your book bag. We'll talk about it later. That's when I realized he has the bear, that he did not put it in his book bag. He just pretended to put it in his book bag, but he put it back into that pocket. I need you to fix it. I said, no, love. I said, I'm in the other room. I don't have the kit to fix it. I said, but like I told you before, when we go back at the end of the day during dismissal, I'll be able to check to see if I even have the kit. I didn't want to say I could fix it because I couldn't remember if the safety pins were even over there. And I have a needle and thread back there too. But I just didn't want to say I had it and then find out I didn't. So I was like, well, I'm going to check. So now he goes back to his table, and little by little, he slinks out of the door. So now, but he doesn't do that till I start teaching. Now I'm teaching. I see Carlos, please take your seat. So the first time he goes towards the door, he comes back and sits down. When he thinks I'm engaged teaching, then he goes out of the door. I then have to call the office for them to come and get him. This has got to be, we hadn't been in the room very long. Like, I'm just starting to teach the lesson. They get him, and they find him in the hall because I have the other 9 in the room. They have him in the hall. I tell him what hall that he went out into the 3rd grade hall. And so they bring him back about, if we have specials at 10:55, they probably brought him back about 10:50. So he comes back to the class. I try to show him what we did to catch him up. He starts asking me about the teddy bear again because now we're cleaning up because it's time to transition to the gym. He's like, Miss Corbin-May, can you fix my bear? Can you whatever? I'm like, no, love. I said, so now he still has the bear, right? So now I'm like, no, love, I can't fix it right now. I said, but I promise you I'm going to look when we go back. When it's time for dismissal, I'll look. Your second load, that'll give me enough time to do it. I said, why don't you take the bear, put it on my table, so as soon as we come back after recess, I'll see it and I'll get it. So I watch him go up the hall. My room is, like I said, 50 feet. There's another classroom right across the hall and another classroom next to that. And then my classroom's next. I watch him go, from my door. Watch him go in. He takes it in. He comes back. I said, did you leave it on my desk? He says, yes. I said, okay, I'll come on and do work, and then we'll go back. So now he just starts slinking, like towards the door. I said, no, love, you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to take care of it. I said, but we're going to get ready to line up for specials now anyway. So now I line up the class for specials inside the classroom. Then I line them up outside the classroom because whenever we have specials, we have 3 kids that come from another classroom all the way down the hall. And then the 7 kids are 2 classrooms up. And then I'm in this classroom kind of in the middle. And so I line up mine outside a lot of times first so I can catch, the kids. So he refuses to line up with the kids. Now he's combating me or confronting me about but my bear, and it's broken, and it's my friends, and I'm going to get in trouble if it's broken. And I'm like, I understand. I said, so at the end of the day, I'm thinking I can just calm him down by saying, I'm going to get to it. I said, we have a break now. I may be able to look at it. I said, but I have a meeting. I said, so I said, I need to meet with Mr. Cooper. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to fix it now. But if, I don't even know if I have the kit. I said, but you put it on my desk. So if I get in there, I'll go and I'll take care of it. Well, I need you to fix it. And he starts stomping and he's yelling and his hands are swinging. He's like, you need to fix it right now. I said, no, it's time to go to specials. I have to get the rest of the class down to specials. We need to go to specials. I said, do you want to go to the gym? He says, yes. I said, well, okay. I said, so when you come back from gym, I'll have an answer for you as to whether I have this kit to help fix it. So now I'm waiting for the rest of the class to come out. The rest of the hallway gets busy by this time. My class has been probably in the hallway a few seconds already, or a minute, because now I've been talking to him. I don't even really know. I probably went out at 54. We're supposed to get him out at 55 or 53. So, and we're going to the gym, which basically they normally go through the third grade hall, and then they cut through the pass into the gym, which we do all the time. We normally join the back of Miss Heron's class, because her classroom's closer to the gym. She normally stands at the door, and then I send them, and I just kind of walk down with my group. But this day, looks like she had a question for another teacher. So while I'm talking to Carlos, while I'm trying to get him to go online, the rest of the kids are kind of getting impatient because they want to get, of course, to the gym. So now I'm like, come on, class, let's start walking. So now Carlos is walking and talking with me. But because there's a machine from the custodians kind of in a way, and the classes are going out, I kind of just stand at the door. And I can't really kind of go by because I'm talking to him. Normally I would squeeze by, but because he's talking to me, he's on my right. The kids are to the right of him. There's really not room for 3 people to come across to go through the door. So I kind of stand at the door. I talk to him. I said, well, hey, listen, why don't you go to the gym? Go ahead and join these kids on the line. Enjoy gym, and I'll see what I can do about the teddy bear. I watch him go out the door. I wait until, because he's in a line of other kids, I wait until he kind of hits the gym door. Seems like I see the gym teacher like right there, so I'm not even thinking anything else. A few more kids come out. I don't know if they were from Heron's class, or maybe they might have come from Miss McDonald's class, because by then I've been talking to him in the hall, which normally I'm not doing. They normally lined up quietly in the hall. I don't even realize. I start walking back because what I knew, it felt like he was going to look back or something. I was like, no, he's going to want to engage. Once I saw him get by that gym door, I turned around. So maybe I'm going to say 10 minutes later, because my goal was not to go into the other classroom. But since I wanted to see if I had the kit, I went back into room 11, which is the other classroom, like to see if I had it. And I'm in there, and the ESOL teacher comes in, and Miss McDonald's there. We're talking about how they have an intervention binder. So we're having like this meeting, and we're talking about what's an intervention binder and how they did this next set of tests to see where the kids are, and we're talking about it. And a custodian comes to the door, and because I'm at the test, because of where my desk is, I see her first. Mr. Cooper's kind of standing in front of Miss McDonald, so she can't really see anybody in the door. And I'm looking at Miss Eloy, and I'm like, hey, Miss Eloy. And she's like, hey, your student is outside. I'm like, he's outside? Like, and in my first mind, I'm thinking outside. Send him in, like he's standing outside. She's like, no, he's outside by the gym. I said, Miss Eloy, he's supposed to be in the gym. Why would he be outside the gym? So I said, Miss Eloy, please do me a favor, because my classroom is like the 6th classroom up the hall, where I was in room 11. There's only one other class. So I said, knock on the gym. Maybe I'm in my head, I'm thinking maybe he went to the bathroom, because I'm confused. I'm like, what? I'm like, Miss Eloy, he can't be outside. He had to have made it in the gym in my head, right? I'm like, Miss Eloy, just knock on the door and they'll let him in the gym. Because he often likes to go to the bathroom when it's time for gym. So I have to watch that he makes it to the gym or anywhere else. Because every time we have specials, he wants to go to the bathroom. Any transition, he wants to go to the bathroom. He wants to get water, he wants to go to the bathroom. But he had already, I guess, taken care of it that day, so he didn't say he had to go to the bathroom. Hence, he was in the hall with me speaking about his teddy bear. So I tell Miss Eloy that. Miss Eloy then paces back and forth. I don't really understand. Because in my head, I'm like, okay, I guess she's going back to him to knock on the door. Because being that she saw him out there, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, okay, so the kid is outside. You just came to me. And now the kid's back outside. So now I'm like confused about what to do. I'm like, and he was just mad at me right before about stomping because I don't want to get him riled up about the teddy bear again. So I look at Mr. Cooper, and Mr. Cooper's like, you know what? I'll go out and see what's going on. I said, thank you, Mr. Cooper. I said, because he'll probably be more calmer with you because he's a little upset at me because I didn't fix his teddy bear. So fast forward, now it's lunchtime. About 12:15, Mr. Cooper comes into the lunchroom and says, I got pulled in the office about what happened in the classroom. Evidently, the custodian must have went back and said somebody yelled at her that had a harsh tone. And so I was interviewed about what happened. Matter of fact, I didn't know that yet. No, I didn't. He says, I got interviewed about what happened with Carlos because he was in the hall. What happened? And he's looking at us. I said, okay, well, I guess you told her that Missy Lloyd came and told us, and then you went out to, get him back in the gym. So I said, I did see him later on with Coach Washington pass by while I was in, because once we finished that, I went back to room 5 once I knew I had the kit. And I knew I had the kit. I put his teddy bear back, because I was like, you know what? If he's going to yell and scream, I had already told him, I said, listen, you have to be calm for me to fix it. I said, if you're going to yell and scream at me, I'll put it in your book bag and we'll make a decision later. Or if you feel more comfortable, you take it home and your mom can solve it, can fix it. So anyway, he tells me they interviewed him, asking him what happened. He has like a face of alarm. And I'm like, okay. But I don't know what happened. Like, I know I saw Mr. Cooper with him. I know Mr. Cooper went out, and I know Coach Washington walked by with him later. But in my head, I know he goes to the bathroom a lot. Coach Washington could have been taking him to the bathroom and then back. He's a para-pro with the other coach. So I don't think anything of it. Now, that's at 10-ish before it's time to pick, or 11-ish before it's time to pick him up. I see Coach Washington. He comes at lunchtime about 12:15 explaining. So then he leaves, but he looks concerned, but I don't know. I don't hear anything about it. I don't know why, Carlos was in the office. I know he was in the office when it was time to pick them up because he doesn't come back to class. That's why he was late coming back in. So they keep him after specials, and they probably bring him in lunches at 12:02. They probably brought him in right before lunch, like a few minutes before lunch. So they kept him however long he was there from specials in the lunch. They bring him back. Carlos refuses then to leave and go to lunch. So at first, I have the kids line up. I'm trying to, do all the positive. Come on, Carlos. Come on, everybody, line up. Here's your point. Here's your point. Da, 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 da. He refuses. He sits in the back and he refuses to get up. I eventually line the kids up and let them walk up the hall, and I watch them go into the lunchroom. And then I walk up the hall because there was a teacher in the hall. I said, do you have a walkie? I don't know why. I'm not thinking about hitting the 3 buttons. I'm not thinking about using the thing because at the same time, I wanted to be in the hall watching the kids or, where I can be seen. I really didn't want to go back in the classroom because something about it just gave me not a good anyway. So eventually, I try to get his attention. I try to get him back. When the teacher doesn't have, I look up the hall. I go up the hall real quick trying to see if somebody's in the intervention room. So I go back in the classroom. I'm like, Carlos, hey, come on. Let's go. I said, come on. Let's go to lunch. Are you going to eat in here? I said, no, I normally eat in the lunchroom with Miss McDonald. He said, oh, I thought you were going to eat in here. I said, no, I'm not. I said, but if you want lunch bunch, we can do that another day. I said, but that's a reward. I had done lunch bunch with another set of kids a few days before, and he had been asking. It's like a coupon for like 20 points on PBIS. He's got over 100 points, I think, at that point. So he could have got the coupon once I opened the store. So I'm not concerned about that. Then he's like, I don't want to go to lunch. He just sits. So now I go to the phone. hit the panic button, let him know that he's refusing to leave and go to lunch. I'm standing at the door, in the doorway. He's sitting at the back of the classroom. Miss Seibert walks by me. She doesn't speak. She kind of stares at me blankly, but then walks by. And then she starts talking to him. So being that she didn't address me, I didn't address, I just said, hey, Miss Seibert, and she didn't really respond. I kind of walk out because by this point, it's after 1:15. I've already missed almost half my lunch, right? So I'm like, let me go ahead. Let me hurry up and eat, you know. She has Carlos. So so I'm trying to remember everything because this was September 10th. So then she has Carlos. I go to lunch. That's when Mr. Cooper comes in a little later. So it must have been later than 10:15. I don't know what time he comes in to say they had interviewed him about that. So the following morning, I come in maybe 6:45 or so. Coach Washington comes by and he says, yeah, I was here late and I was pulled in the office and asked what happened with Carlos yesterday. Like, did Miss Corbin-May watch him go into the gym, and were the gym teachers by the door? And I said, yeah, I told her, I didn't say anything because they hadn't asked me anything. I was like, yeah, you guys are normally right by the door, and we let them go through the door from third grade. We've been doing that the 2 years I've been on third grade hall. This is the way we've been doing it. I said, so he said, yeah. He said, but Miss Corbin-May, the way they was asking the questions, he's like, they're probably going to call. He said, and they called Elliot, who is the main coach, at home about what happened with Carlos. So, it's like I'm just coming in. I didn't even make it to the door to badge in. We're like in between the gym and the main building. And I'm like, huh. So then coach says, yesterday I was going to the bathroom, and when I was going to the bathroom, Carlos was outside. So I guess in the time that Miss Eloy must have came, coach just happened to be going to the bathroom and Carlos was outside. Now, what was odd is I had made it back to the other classroom when I saw coach call him. So I don't know when. By then, Mr. Cooper had already gone. I mean, I don't know what the time frame is. And he's like, yeah, and Carlos was outside. I said, yeah, Miss Eloy told me that he was out there. I said, and Mr. Cooper went out. Because I said, because Carlos was mad with me about something and I didn't want to get him upset. I said, but you know what? Whatever you told her is fine. I mean, I know I walked him to the door. I know I watched him walk, with the rest of the line out to the gym. I'm not thinking anything of it. So now I come inside the building. Now it's probably close to 7. I go inside. I tell my co-teacher about how now I realize Cooper had got called in the day before and Coach Washington had stopped me. No, it couldn't have been a few minutes. Coach Washington comes to my room. Then Coach Paul comes to my room, Ms. Elliott. And they start saying, I don't know what happened, but they're asking a lot of questions about how we hand off kids. Because evidently Carlos was locked outside of the 2 buildings yesterday. I said, yeah. I said, I know that happened, but I didn't know that happened until Miss Eloy told me that he was outside. I said, and even when she said it, I think I first thought she meant he was standing outside my classroom door, like where I was, like, tell him come in, I'm not thinking he's in between the 2 buildings. So I don't know what time it is, but in the process of this, my co-teacher's like, hey, I have a meeting with Shires. I got a invite to a meeting with Shires, and I was like, oh, okay. She's like, oh, it'll be during prep time or whatever. So fast forward. I don't know what happens in the meeting. I don't know what they're meeting about. I'm not even thinking it's about this situation. Because we had a PD or we had a meeting where they were training us on something. So she left during the meeting. I'm still in the meeting. While I'm in the meeting, I get a ping that I have a meeting with Ms. Shires in her office at 2:30. By now, I'm like putting it together. They've interviewed all these people. So, I'm like, well, I guess that's what it was about, right? So I pack up, get ready to go to our office for 2:30. Because we leave at 2:45, and I figured it was, at least 15 minutes we were going to be in the office. And I didn't leave her office till 4 o'clock in the evening. She started off by asking me like what happened with Carlos or what happened with Miss Eloy. And I start explaining what I was saying. And she is like, yeah, Miss Eloy came to the office and said that Miss McDonald had a harsh tone, but I realized it was you that had a harsh tone. And I said, actually, I don't think I had a harsh tone. I said, but I was. She was like, yeah, you were surprised. I said, yeah. I was like, oh my God, he's outside? What do you mean he's outside? If he's outside, send him in, But if he's outside, so then when she explains about gym, I'm like, please knock on the door to the gym, because the gym teachers must not realize he's outside. So we go through the process of that. And she's saying, but Miss Corbin-May, if I had a student and I thought they was in danger, I would have run outside to see where they were. I said, well, honestly, when Miss Eloy came, I didn't really think at first that she left him outside by himself. I said, so it didn't even dawn on me at first that he was left, like she came to tell me, but left him alone. I said, so when she first says it, I'm just like in shock, like he's outside the classroom, send him in. He's supposed to be in gym, I'll take him back to gym, is how I'm thinking this conversation is going to go. But that's not what happens. And Miss Corbin-May, you're such a caring teacher. If it was my kid, I would think that you would go outside. I said, well, part of the problem is that he wanted me to do something, and I told him I couldn't do it right then. So he was a little upset with me before gym. I said, so Mr. Cooper went out for me. I said, but I didn't think that would be a problem. He says, well, Miss Eloy said that you had a harsh tone. Well, I said, oh my God, I didn't mean to. I said, I was more. She's like, you were in shock? I said, yeah, I was in shock. I said, so I probably did sound alarmed, but it wasn't at her. It's like, please just go tell and I'm from New York. I use my hand. I'm like, please go tell the gym teachers, oh my God, that he's outside. So I'm probably a little hype, and my hand is going up, and I'm like, please go tell him that he's outside or whatever. And then Mr. Cooper goes. So I said, so I didn't mean it to her. I said, I just was concerned. Like, she's telling me he's outside, and now I realize he's outside. And now, since she's coming to me, he's still outside. So now she explains that Miss Eloy, instead of going back outside, what she did was she ran to the office to tell them that the kid was outside and that I didn't want to go outside to help the kid. And so now I'm like, huh? I was like, I speak to Miss Eloy every day. I say good morning every time I see her. I've never had a harsh tone with Miss Eloy. I said, now I probably was excited because of what she was saying. I said, but I just wanted him to get where he needed to be. And at the same time, I'm like, she's by the door. I'm all the way in the room. If he's still out there, her standing by anyway, I know what my brain was thinking. So she's like, no, she came to the office and she was telling the people in the office, which means she told the secretaries, because Miss Eloy only speaks Spanish, and they must have related to Miss Shires, because Miss Shires does not speak Spanish, nor does Miss Seibert. So I assume she spoke to the secretaries, told them about the thing, and she says Miss Eloy just was so shocked that you didn't like hop out the chair and run and go get him. I said, one, I was in shock that he was outside. I said, so it kind of startled me, and I was kind of frozen because at first I didn't even think he was outside. I thought he was in the hallway, I said, and then when I realized, oh my God, it's probably about the teddy bear, that's when Mr. Cooper said, I'll go, I said, so I didn't really think anything more of it. I said, and Mr. Cooper eventually said that, I don't even know if I ever spoke to Mr. Cooper after that now. I only remember speaking to him at lunchtime when he came to tell me they had interviewed him. So, she says, now watch this video. So in the video, you see me down by the door talking to Carlos. I think And I said, can you rewind that? Because I'm trying to see, can they see when I was in the hallway and how I had kept asking him to go online and how he kept talking to me and whatever. So I said, can you rewind it back? I said, because I want to see, can you see when he's yelling and stomping and screaming at me? I said, I want to see if you see that. I said, and I don't know if, you know, where that starts and stops. But you can see me, I guess you can't see my classroom door, and you can't really see that I have the kids lined up there. But you see the top of my head when I come past the door is kind of what it is. You see me when I'm standing on that side, when I'm lining up the kids, and you can see I'm talking to somebody, but you can't in all frames see that who I'm talking to. But as I walk the class down, the 10 kids down the hall, you can see I'm talking to Carlos while the rest of the kids actually were already online, because I actually send them ahead when I see that Miss Heron's class is done. And then I walk with Carlos up the hall. So now I walk with Carlos up the hall. I asked him, does he want to keep talking about this, or would he like to go to the gym? Or, I told him I would try to take care of it if I can, if I don't have a meeting, if I don't, I said, but otherwise, we'll talk about it later, because right now you were yelling and screaming at me, but I'll make sure that your teddy bear ends up in your book bag, and then we'll talk about it during second load or at the end of the day, what we're going to do. But if you want to go to the gym, why don't you go ahead? Because now I realize we almost at the end of the line. He goes out the door. I stand there a few more seconds. I walk away. Now, there were a few more kids still going through the door, but they were not my group. My group had actually already gone through the door. I don't know where the rest of the teachers were for the groups that came out later, but at that point, I'm walking away. I'm looking at him, but trying not to give him eye contact to give him a reason to come back. But in the video, what you can see is I walk through the door. He walks back through the door and tiptoes behind me. He's like tiptoeing with his hands up like this. And though there are two teachers talking that I passed in that first classroom, I think I hear something behind me, and you see me kind of turn. But then he dashes into the second classroom, which is Miss Heron's classroom. Now, when I think I hear something, I turn, I see Miss Heron. So I'm like, well, maybe I just heard her move. When you see me walking, you see Miss Heron behind me. She didn't see him run in the room. I, of course, don't know because he's behind me. A kid who, at that point, the door is open, yells him, hey, Carlos, or something. I don't know what he says, but Carlos, they must call him. You see him run back out the classroom and go out the door with the student. Then the door is shut. So I'm like, oh my God, he came back in the building? He was behind me? He ran into Heron's room? I didn't see him? You didn't see him? And then you see later on when Miss Eloy comes in. So I believe that by the time she came to me, it might have been, we normally get them, that's probably 11 o'clock, between 11:55 and 11 o'clock. I believe it wasn't too long I was in the room, so maybe it was 11:05, 11:10 or something like that when Miss Eloy tells me he's outside. Because I think she fast forwards to when Miss Eloy comes in the door. Which means, at least my thought is, that even if the coaches were right there and he looked, he must have hidden, that they didn't see anybody out there or what have you. I don't know. So she's like, well, Miss Corbin-May, what do you notice? I said, I noticed he came back in behind me. She says, yeah, but your class was still coming. I said, no, my class had already gone through. She's like, but there's still kids walking and you've already moved. And I'm like, but that's not my... And then I just stopped talking because I realized I've already said that wasn't my class. My class had already gone. I said, I saw him get to the gym door. I said, normally the coaches are right there. I can't halfway remember because he was talking to me. I probably was more distracted. Kids are still moving. They're still moving outside, whatever. So I said, I don't remember. I said, I know I saw him get right by the gym door, and that's when I turned around. I said, but we do this all the time. Miss Heron's class will come out first, or we'll come out first. And whoever's by the door normally stays there till all the kids go out. I said, but normally Miss Heron would stay there. But when I realized she left the door and went to talk to somebody, that's when I realized I had to walk with Carlos to the door because there was no teacher by the door. Well, you still left kids in the building. And I was like, no, those were not my class. You know, I had 9 kids with me. So when Carlos went out, my kids had already gone out. They had gone through the door pretty much while I was walking him up the hall, or as I made it to the corner, I watched them go out. And she's like, well, Miss Corbin-May, you should have walked them all the way to the gym door and made sure every kid got into the gym. And I said, you know what? I said, honestly, most days I do stand there until they all get in the gym. I said, but because he was talking to me, I realized I turned back when the rest of Heron's class or even Miss McDonald's class probably was coming through. I said, because my kids had already gone through the door. And she was like, well, I think you should have walked your whole class out. And there were still kids in the hallway and you left the doors open. And I said, well, Miss Heron's group was holding the door. I said, and normally we don't have the 2 doors open, but for some reason that day we did have 2 doors open because Miss Heron's group was holding the door. And it's probably because the machine was there, so they were trying to get kids through a little faster. I don't know. I said, but, you know, normally I would stand there till everybody made it in the gym. I said, I can't even say. And I said, if you see me on any other day, I normally walk every kid to the door and I make eye contact with the teachers, and I normally do that. So she says, yeah, Miss Corbin-May, I understand. She's like, and since this seems like this is your first time ever having to have this kind of reprimand. I said, yeah. So I've been teaching 27 years. I never got pulled to the principal office about negligence or not doing something. I said, but once I saw him walk through our door and walk right by the gym door, which is normally what we do. We've been doing this for several weeks of school. And we did it all last school year too. So then she says, well, the issue is there's no camera out there. And nobody knew he was out there. And you were the last one to see the child. I said, oh my God. I said, now I got my hand in my head. I'm like, oh my God. I said, this is crazy. I said, I've never had anything like this happen before. I can't believe that this is a safety issue. You know, now I'm saying, oh my God, I should have walked him all the way. I should have made sure the door was closed. You know, I'm going through the gambit. She goes, yes, I see, Miss Corbin-May. You're such a conscientious person. You realize all the things. I said, and I understand you have to write, you have to show me this and that. There's a reprimand. And she's like, well, it won't go into your file. I'll just write you a note saying that we met about the situation, and you'll see it in your email, probably this evening, that we met and we talked about it. She was like, but I've never had any issues with you not following protocol or anything like that. So this is just like a warning. So when she says that, that kind of piques me, like, yeah, you've worked with me for a year and I never had a reason to have a reprimand. I've been at this school and several schools and I've never had a reprimand. So it was just odd. She was like, well, this is your first one, so I won't have to really go in. But I had to make sure that I did the proper investigations before, drawing a conclusion. I said, well, in the future, which I normally do, I'll make sure they get to the gym, or, I said, but I do it with every other class on every other day. She's like, yeah, I always see you do it. I said, yeah, I mean, I do normally do it. I said, but I don't know. I said, it probably was because normally the kids line up, they're quiet. I'm not talking to a kid while I'm doing what I'm doing. And that was a distraction. I said, but he refused to go online and at first refused to go, to the gym. She says, well, don't worry about it. This is the first time. I'm sorry this had to happen to you. She then told me a story about how, there was something she did wrong on some report and Miss Seibert had to reprimand her, and she had never really done anything wrong, so she knew how I felt. I said, well, I thank you for understanding. I said, but this was very scary because the gate is broken. You don't have a camera out there. I saw him walk through the door. I saw him, but I could have never seen him come back in the door. But had the doors been closed, he couldn't have come back in the door. But either way, he could have been out there if he hid. But the point I'm trying to make is the doors were still open. And like I said, there were 2 teachers that I passed that he came behind me in between, but nobody saw him. We even see a kid that comes out, I think, out of Heron's room later that runs to the back of the line, So I don't know. I didn't realize that the questioning was pointed. And it wasn't until I got into the situation on the 9th that I realized, 1, you try to fill in my words and you have pointed questions. And so then by the time I get to the meeting on the 10th, which was this Friday from 8 to 10, each time these meetings are lasting more than an hour or more than the time I think it should be, it's like you keep asking me questions so that I answer. But the truth is you have me answering so you can use it against me. So now at this point, I think I leave the meeting about 10:55. I only know because my alarm went off. Now, 9:55, because my alarm goes off telling me it's time to get ready for small group. I get ready for small group because they have some tests to take, and I want to quickly review before they started the assessment and just explain, what I showed them yesterday and what they're going to see and remember the strategies or whatever. So listening to the questions first, then go back in the story. Don't worry about the hard words, but try to get the gist of what happened and what happened first. So we're talking about that. And then I realized, like, oh my God. It's like once I got the kids settled and they're doing this. Now, mind you, the kids have been on 3 tests already. That was their 3rd test. So now their computers are dying. And now the Wonders has 3 different rosters. And I'm trying to reframe the roster. So I get everybody set up. Or trying to get everybody set up because the rosters there's 3 rosters and some kids clicked the wrong one. They knew how to get to it, but they were clicking the wrong one. So now there's no test. So I'm solving that. And now Carlos is like, I don't want to take a test. I want to go on Minecraft. I said, no, love. We have been taking tests on one. I said, I know. I said, I feel so bad. I said, I promise you, if we get a chance to finish all these things, I will give you time at the end of the day to do something, you would like to do. I said, but for right now, we've got to do this test. So he puts his head down, refuses to open up his notebook. I mean, his, not notebook, computer. I said, but you know what? Why don't you put your head down for a minute? Take a little break. If you need to go to the cool out corner, the bucket is there. Go sit there for a few minutes. Calm yourself down. And then by the time I probably finish getting everybody else on, I'll help you get on. Like I said, computers are dying. They're clicking wrong things, but I get them on. At this point, I don't know what roster it's on either because they told us it was the active one, but it wasn't the active one, and it wasn't the one with my name in writing. It ended up being in the homeroom one, so that way they can compare homerooms. So I knew that, but then we got an email about using the active one. So anywho, so I click through them on one of the students, get them set up, get the power cords, plug them in, get everybody where they need to be. When I finish doing that, I go back to him and I'm like, hey, we need to take this test. What do you want to do? Would you rather take the test here, this, that. So we go through the process. Just so happens that the ESOL teacher comes in early. He normally doesn't come in the morning. He comes in the afternoon. But he had some probes he needed to do. So he was asking any help. I said, well, hey, I'm trying to get them all set up. Carlos is, having an issue. I said, but all the computers are dying and I'm trying to set it up. So he sits with Carlos. Gets him on. Carlos probably finishes in 2 seconds. He doesn't stay on there very long. And I admire, like, hey, go back in, try to do it, da. But by then, they've had 2 tests on the computer this morning. So from 8 to 10, they were testing. I'm now trying to give them a test again. I first tried to do that review, and we do wiggles and we do exercises first because I realized they have to sit back and take this test, which is a bit long. And I was glad because I was like, okay, They'll do some now. They'll have specials. We'll have 15 minutes. When they come back, we'll leave it up so they'll have 15 minutes. Then they'll have lunch. We'll go to the bathroom, and then hopefully they'll only have 30, 40 minutes left, before the end of the day. I said, this is the one time our schedule might help them, stay focused. So he gets on, what have you. But at this point, I take them to, I think, to specials at that time. And now I realize what has happened. Like that, I'm basically, they're trying to say I don't do my job. And I get called into a meeting about conferences. So that happens first. But I think when I come out of that meeting and I'm coming to make sure that computers are all set up right and that the volume's working and all the things, I'm like, oh, wow. I have PBIS plus a separate system where I give them points and they take certificates home when they get them filled in. I ready where if they get an 80, 90, or 100, they get prizes. And every week I see how many lessons they passed, and they get prizes as they do that too. So I give it to them as they get the good grades, and I give it to them, when they pass 5 lessons at a time. And so I had it set up. I think that might be how I started, was I was trying to give them prizes. I was like, I don't want them to start with a test. So I think I had given them the prizes and all of that first and talked about it, because 2 students had done almost 30 lessons. And I was like, yeah, when you get to 25, being that it's half of 50, I'll get you a special treat from the lunchroom. And we talked about that. So they all wanted to make sure they knew what number. I called it out. I let them know what numbers they had. I said, when everybody gets up to 25, you'll get the special treat from the cafeteria. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do when you get to 50 lessons. I may have to buy you like a special breakfast or something like that. And so anyway, that pretty much is all I can remember to say. And I've been talking for 1 hour and 56 minutes. And the point is, I have never felt so dejected and like stupid, like I didn't know what I was doing, and realizing that people were saying things to try to get me in trouble. The issue with all of this is I have rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's. So I've told the principal that in the past, because when I have all these special ed reports, I normally have to wear gloves because my wrist or hand or fingers will, kind of do like this or crunch, or it's hard to open and close, it'll ache. So I had told her, even last school year, like, can you put me back in general ed, what have you, because the paperwork really with my rheumatoid arthritis not working well. That wasn't the first time I had the conversation, but I had it with her in September. Last year I had it in Marchish or April when they were asking about placement. And so when I got home and stress exacerbates it, I realized what happened. And it was like I couldn't move. When I went to wake up or in the middle of the night, across my chest was hard. Across my back was hard. My knees were stiff. My elbows were stiff. My hips were stiff. My wrists were stiff. My fingers were stiff. And I was in pain. So I was like moaning and groaning throughout the night. So I didn't sleep well on Friday night. By Saturday morning, when it was time to get up, I hardly could get out the bed. Everything was in pain. Everything was swollen. And then I realized that whole interaction had stressed me out. I basically couldn't stop crying. It just felt like during the middle of the night, every time I thought about it, it just made me feel so sad that after all these years and all the time and patience, I have the class door. The whole room 11, I decorated it because that teacher doesn't like to decorate. So hence room 5 is not that decorated because I spent time decorating room 11. Because initially I thought I was a co-teacher, not a small group teacher. So I thought I was going to be in a room with her again like last year. So I didn't find out really that I was going into room 5 until, school basically had started. So I came to set up the classroom with my family, a year prior, and just kind of fixed up stuff this school year. So I say all of that to say, like, I had asked could I either stay with this co-teacher or could I really ask to go to regular ed? I was told there were no regular ed positions open, that I had to stay in co-teaching. And those, no, she didn't say anything about what I was saying about my ailment. She just said, really, the only two positions I have open for you is either to stay co-teaching with Miss McDonald or you can do the core class, which at the time I didn't really know what she meant by core class. And I was like, is it special ed? And she was like, yes. And I was like, with the rheumatoid arthritis, if you have an opening and whatever. So she goes to her cabinet. She kind of leans it open where she has the full who's in what class. She doesn't open it all the way. And she says, well, I have gifted open. She says, but I know you're not certified in gifted. So I end up having a conversation with her. And I say, well, in New York, when you did special ed, you actually did get gifted certification at the same time. I said, but I noticed when I got to Georgia, it didn't transfer. I said, but you know what? I really wouldn't mind doing it. I said, it's the one certification. I really want to see if I have a full cert in it, because it was like part of special ed. It was like 3 classes. I was like, if I did a full cert, I said, I really would be interested in going back to figure out like how the difference are. I said, because I did that degree before 1998. I'm sure there's a lot more new information. She says, well, I need somebody that's certified in it right now. And I was like, I understand I don't have that certification. I said, but if I'm able to do it, I wouldn't mind doing that. Fast forward a week into school, 2 teachers tell me that they were asked to do the certification. They did not start the certification for the gifted classes until August, the end of August. So even though she told me I couldn't in April or whenever that was, she actually asked those teachers to do it in August. So she already had that set up. She just didn't want me to come out of special ed. And I'm certified to teach general ed. The other thing that happened, though I can't remember the date, was we had a meeting with my SSP, my special ed supervisor, like the second week of school. Might have been the 3rd week, but I want to say it was the 2nd week. He said, I got to have an emergency meeting. He wasn't even in the school building. It was like 12:30. We need an emergency meeting. 12 o'clock it must have been, because it was lunchtime. 12 o'clock, because all of a sudden he was told that I had to be the small group teacher. How I know is that was really the turn of events, because at first he's like, hey, we might have to switch small group, da-da-da-da. And then near the middle of the meeting, he says, Corbin-May, because we were in a room, so he could see my face. He says, I need to see your face. And I said, oh, okay, I'll lean up, because we had the blurred background. He says, it looks like you're the only one certified to teach small group. I said, Mr. Griffin, I've been here 5 years. Almost everybody in this room have taught small group except for me. I've never been asked to teach small group. How? Shedden was in the room with me. Craig was in the room with me. I said, and then Shedden was like, yeah, I've never been asked to do it either. I said, yeah, that's true. And Cole is in the room with me. I said, and Craig and Cole have both done it. Seguro has done it. She was on the video. I said, but I've never done it. Why? Why am I certified? Well, you're the only one that's elementary and special ed. So you know the general curriculum. And she looked at your licenses and saw, now mind you, I don't think she ever saw all the licenses I have, because I have admin, I have coaching, I have a lot of licenses. I have middle school social studies, I have middle school English, I have a page of licenses with so it turns to this whole thing about how I should be small group all day. But they realize if they do that, so he's like, I didn't want to make a decision to take you out of the classroom and put you in that classroom all day. I want this to be a group decision, because at this point, I was teaching 3rd grade small group. Miss Craig is doing 2nd grade small group. And Miss Cole is doing 4th and 5th grade small group. So it was we would have to change all the schedules to accommodate, especially I think the 2nd grade. And so he was like, then they have to meet new teachers, and we sent out letters and da-da-da-da. So everybody's like, no, keep the schedule as it is. People who are not certified, they have to send a letter home. So Ms. Cole is like, yeah, I sent home a letter last year. They told me it wasn't a big deal. So I'm like, oh, you sent it home before? So She was like, yeah, I had to send it home last year and maybe the year before that too, or whenever. She was like, they said it wasn't a big deal. So I'm surprised that now. So there was something brewing then, but I didn't realize that. Like, why the second or third week of school is it now that you discover that I'm the only one that can teach small group? And you've never approached me about teaching small group. Even before, the year before, when I asked about it, you were like, oh, Miss Cole or whoever is good at it. So you're good in the classroom. Okay, I don't know what everybody's doing. If they're fabulous, there's no reason to, change up anything. But now I'm the only one certified. So I play all of that back to say that for me, there was a lot of something in the background trying to get stirred up. And I hadn't taught small group in elementary, nor were we given the kits for elementary for special ed teachers. I mean, it just was all these things. I was like, no, let me just do third grade because I've started going through that kit already, rather than trying to figure out how I'm going to do not first grade, second grade, fourth and fifth, and third with a system I don't really understand. And being that everybody now had started, getting themselves together, it was like, let's just keep it the way it is for now. And then next year we can rediscuss. This is a very long dictation, but it is obvious that when I thought about it, hence why I was crying, hence why even I can't really walk because both of my knees are swollen. I basically have to walk with a cane or something. Simple things like washing my hands hurts, simple things. So it just aggravated my whole immune system, and it caused my body to shut down that I was in bed for 2 days. Caused me to cry like pretty much all night. It hurts my heart to think that after 27 years and the fact that all of this started because I was trying to sew some kid's teddy bear, that somebody's going to say to me that I'm not doing my job and that I don't care about kids and that my goal and what I say is to hurt kids. But you couldn't prove I didn't do my job. You couldn't prove that I said anything to a kid that was inappropriate. But yet those were the accusations that were laid that you were trying to find out. Because in the end, I have 10 kids. The other person has 4. Last year, I had 13. The year before that, I started out the year with 13. So I have a class of 17 and 13 out of 17 is special ed. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like at this point, I can't move. I can move my arms much better today, but my legs, even if I showed you, you will see my kneecap. One kneecap is double the size of the other one. My wrists have lumps on them because it's just what it is. My hand has a lump. I mean, it's just a stressful situation. And last night, I had finished my progress reports before Friday, or Thursday night. So I had most of them done before Thursday. So once I realized I didn't get the PD time, I just was doing it little by little during the week once I didn't get a response the week before. So I knew I just had to finalize them. And honest to God, when I opened up my computer and remembered there was an email, like my heart went into palpitation, so much so that I closed Outlook and I closed Teams. I mean, it felt like I was on a roller coaster, and all I wanted to do was to finalize and all I had to do was finalize. It's just the clicks to finalize. The data was already in. It was just checking it, making sure all the comments made sense, all that kind of stuff. And just click finalize. And the whole hour that it may have taken me to click all their goals and, read them over and whatever, my heart was just beating out of my chest. And I was like, I will conquer this email in the morning. And there were 3 emails from Ms. Shires. One, I believe, was from a technology person, or her response to a technology person, because we realized we cannot shut off Byron's access to anything on the computers. Because I saw the response from the technologist earlier. One was about the curriculum, so that's the next thing. So during prep time, I was in the room probably making sure I had all my probes and had everything set. Somebody knocks on the door, but by the time I make it to the door, the person's gone. Wasn't that long, but she was going to another classroom anyway, so she's knocking on that door. She had brought me Unit 2 of the Wonders Kit, a TE. And so one of the instructional specialists, Miss Conklin, and I said, yeah, I got to give Miss, anyway, I have to, thank you for giving this to me. She says, yeah, you can have it, but you got to give it back by the 21st. I have a training. I said, no problem. I said, I really just want to look at it and really dive in to see what I need to do. Whatever I say to her, she kind of walks away. I guess she might be upset because I have a book. I don't know. So I assume Miss Shires had to go to her and tell her that I needed a book because I don't have one, right? Because initially I said, well, I got one from Dahigo before. I said, I may be able to get Dahigo's book, but maybe they share one. I'm not quite sure. It couldn't have been, I'm there. I bring the book with me back to the other classroom because I was in the other classroom. I grab the book. I bring it back to the other classroom. And a few minutes later, the assistant principal comes in with a box. She says, oh, in the closet, there was a full set. You can have this full set. I said, oh, Miss Conklin just dropped me off one. She was like, I was like, I'll bring it back to her later. I said, because I have to drop off one that I had borrowed Mr. Higo's Unit 1. I said, I got to give hers back. I'll give both of them back. And she says, no, I'll give it back to Miss Conklin. She gives me the box. She also says that she was looking to see if the district had any response to how they wanted small group to streamline the Wonders, because we have to include the scaffolding that takes more time. I said, oh my God, I'll so appreciate that. Hopefully they've thought that through. We've had 9 weeks. Maybe they've had a chance to look at it and figure that out. So I'm excited. I got the box. I got this. But then, it's so funny how you get excited and then you realize. So this box, though I asked for curriculum the first week of school, second week of school, third week of school, nobody realized until I met in this meeting that there was a box of 3rd grade that I could have had this entire time. Like, you gave me a brand new TE kit. She didn't have any of the other kits, but the TE kit, which is what I wanted to do, because the training, I saw where everything was based on the training. I was like, that'll make it easier because I want to make sure they get in time to write. I want to make sure they get in time. I just need to clock it now, since I see how Wonders works and I know how to use the computer. Now I really want to make my class run more efficiently. So I was excited, but then that's when you wonder, like, are people trying to set you up? Like, you gave out the Wonders, which means you knew you had an extra 3rd grade kit. You knew that. But you just didn't give it to me. And you had me borrow one from somebody else when you had a brand new kit. And it makes me now realize, like, was that done all purposely? Like, you wanted me to fail. Like, you gave one teacher 4 and gave me 10, and both behaviors were in there. And that brings me back to the day when my SST came. He says, Ms. Corbin-May, I can't believe you never complained. I said, you never complained? What I did? He actually sent me an email about me not complaining. He says, you never complained about you had 10 and Miss Craig had 4. I said, Mr. Griffin, when I came to you the 2nd week of school, that's what I was talking about. Please don't put any more kids on my caseload. I got 10. He said, I only realized it because Carlos was not supposed to be in your room. Carlos should have been in the other classroom. I don't know who changed him to small group. He can read. I don't know why he's in small group. I said, he was in small group. He's been in my homeroom from the first day of school. When you asked me who was my caseload, that's who was in here. I said, and then you changed Kennedy to make sure she was small group as well. So I'm just flabbergasted, physically in pain at this point. Just thinking about going back to work right now makes my head hurt, my heart beat. But since I'm really not able to walk, there's no way I can chase Carlos or if he elopes, or I can't. Because even Friday afternoon, he didn't want to leave recess because he didn't want to play with a kid, and he was mad because the kid played with them anyway. So he was trying to go up into the trees rather than, he didn't line up with the class. So I had to talk him down from there, because at that point, I guess my body had already started, and I think I realized it was hurting, but I just was hoping it was simple. If I go home and I take what I need, it'll be okay. So at that point, he had climbed up to, there's like a ledge, and I was like, Carlos, you're going to have to come on down for me, love, up between the trees and the rocks. I can't do it today. So normally I'd be right up there with you because I love nature. I said, but today my knee is killing me. I cannot. It's like I don't want to trip on the rocks. I don't want to whatever. So he came down and we talked about what was making him upset and how he told the kid he couldn't play. I said, but I know you don't like it, So we talked through, like, why didn't you want him to play? Because he was being mean to me. I said, you know what? We all have moments where we're mean. We went through the stop, talk, walk. I said, if he was mean, did you tell him to stop? No, I just didn't want to play with him, and that's why I came over here. I said, but you didn't come over here till it was time to line up. Well, I was mad because I didn't want to play with him. I said, well, I understand. And I understood. The rest of the class had lined up. They had started going inside because our time is at dismissal. So basically, he and I was left. Everybody else had gone inside, and we're walking in the lane that's between the school and the playground, because that's where he went up into. So, I mean, what can I say? I just know if that's where he's going to start going places I can't go, and run or walk where cars can come through, it's just not a good idea. And the fact that I asked not to teach special ed, and there was all this hesitation, and I asked for PD, and I asked for this, basically you tried to say to me that somewhere in there, like, well, if you had an issue, you should have said. And I'm like, everything I've wanted, I've asked you for, but they didn't necessarily happen. Even when we had the incident where he eloped, and part of that meeting was that my SSA was supposed to come to my class to observe, to see if there were strategies or what I could do with the group of 10. By then, I had kind of solved the problem for the last hour because I got Mr. Cooper to come in. But all of that to say, he never came in and did an observation. None of them have been in and done an observation. If they come in, it's because they're either taking Carlos out or they're bringing him back in. They have not done a formal observation on me this quarter. And I understand. I'm flex. You don't have to come and see me. But I know they did the one walkthrough where she saw me do the Orton Gillingham, which in the end, in this meeting, even though she probably saw me the first week of it, so that was the beginning of September, I'm now being told I can't do it Friday. So you let me do it for 4 weeks, and then, or 5 weeks. 6, however many weeks, and now I'm being chastised for doing it. So I just don't feel comfortable going back in that building if I have my administrator who is my evaluator and my principal basically investigating whether I'm doing my job. I understand observing teachers. Even if I had said something to the kid that was wrong, I could understand. I'm well able to comprehend, what could be wrong or right. But the fact that it feels like you're trying to get me to say I don't want to be there when I was saying a euphemism about going home and coming back, or when I got flustered when you were asking the kid instead of asking me what happened, when you had the kid for more than 20 minutes in your office, you hadn't done that interview before. But it's like you were saying it so that he could say, what did you say she did? And the crazier part was, sometimes I model sentences in front of them where my back may be turned for 3 seconds, or 5 seconds to write a whole sentence. This case, I was circling something and writing one word. I was showing them how to skim and how to find the words they know. Like, this wasn't even a situation where I was turned for long. Had my computer not needed to do something, that probably is what took long, where I turned to get the screen to come up back right, because it wouldn't let me write on the PDF for a minute. But that was it. And he didn't even notice that I had turned to the computer real quick, because my computer was turned to me by the board where I was standing trying to fix it real quick. So that's the end. I hope I said everything in 2 hours and 20 minutes. But this right here is a trip. And the fact that my illness is, if I could just show you what my hand should look like versus what my knees should look like, or my ankles, or and then I've been teaching 27 years. Have I always been like, oh my God, I got all this stuff to do? Yes. And I've heard other teachers on my team talk about the Sunday night scaries where I've never had that. This is the first time in 27 years I had my heart beat out of my chest for an hour just because I had a computer open. I've never cried for hours just because of accusations from a principal. When my test scores show you I moved them, their probes show you I moved them. Now, don't get me wrong. I love praises and consequences. I know my class, especially, they get more stickers and more erasers. I find these cute erasers, more M&Ms or whatever it is. I always let them choose what they want, than anybody else. But I also expect you to sit in your seat and follow directions. I expect for you to be safe. I expect for you to be accountable for your learning. If everybody else's computer is up, so I'm going to remind you over and over to do that. And I also understand that some children don't like being told what to do, and they want to do what they want to do. And if I am trying to teach 10 children, I should not have to waste time talking to a child and redirecting and lose time from the rest of the kids. What I should be able to do is to tell that child what they need to do, or give them choices, which I do. Do you want to go to the quiet corner for 5 minutes and then we try again? Or, do you want to go sit on a carpet? At first I was doing sit on a carpet because also when they gave out kits, they only gave me one in room 11. I didn't have a cool down kit in room 5. And until he did the incident, I didn't know I needed it. Now, of course, once I met with Mom last Monday, that was that the 7th? I can't remember. Last Monday, Mom explains that he has seizures. So she had him on seizure medications and focus medications, but she stopped giving it to him, that they had run out. But she stopped giving it to him because of the side effects. So hence, even in my data, You'll see, yes, I had to redirect him because at first when school started, Carlos was more like a sleepyhead. Like even one day I had to send him to the nurse because he said he took his sleep gummy rather than his focus gummy. So that's how I knew he was even on a sleep gummy, a focus gummy. I didn't know. I knew about the seizures from the IEP, but I didn't realize it was 3 different medications. Or, maybe I read it. I knew he was taking something, but that day he actually took the wrong medicine, came to school, so he was drowsy. So he either was drowsy or he just flat out didn't want to do work. And so by the time we got to doing small group, I think we had to move them the week of the 20th or 27th. That's when I got him to start wanting to do work. Like at first it was just refusal, but it wasn't eloping and it wasn't, all the other things that I began to see. So it started to have more redirections and corrections to get him to do what he needed to do. And you'll see a jump in the amount of tallies that I have because we came back. We had a Monday off, and it's like we came back and he told me about a situation in his house. I sent them to the counselor about that because I was worried about the situation. But ever since then, I remember it was a Monday off. He told me about the situation. That's when I noticed the change in behavior. And that's why I went and I told the counselor. Now, since then, that student has said he was going to kill somebody, and it was a day I wasn't at work. He said it this week, a day I was at work. So I know this child is having major issues. And I guess the joke about it is before that whole situation, even when he did that, he came out of that room and he hugged me. He used to call me Corbin Mom. But now I even wonder, like after that day and after all the interviews, I noticed he didn't do that anymore. He might have done it once or twice since then. But he would call me Corbin Mom every day, all day. So much that the kids were like, that's not your mom. Don't call her mom. But after that, I would assume that if, depending on how somebody interviewed me, and I make it sound like the teacher doesn't like me, I probably wouldn't think the teacher liked me either. I don't know how they questioned him. I'm like, one day we were good, and the next day we weren't. And then the behaviors just skyrocketed from there. Now I'm worrying about him eloping several times a day. Now I'm trying to get him to the calm down center, or, to pick a place where he can sit and be calm. So if we're on the carpet, maybe he can sit in the back. If we're in the back, if everybody's at their seat, I'll let him come to the carpet with a clipboard, which he likes to specialize attention. He likes being closer to me. So I tried to work it the best I could so he could feel, whatever. But I don't know. I feel like what I've done is my best. I do understand having to learn this curriculum and not really getting what I needed was frustrating. And perhaps they were seeing that on my face, but what they could never say is that I ever showed that frustration about not having. The kids don't know I don't have what I don't have. They don't know because I'm coming to the game and I have the papers and I have the board and I make sure they don't know. Now, they may hear me have to talk to a kid and redirect a lot, but that's part and parcel of the game. I've been doing this 27 years, whether I was regular ed or special ed, there's always a kid to redirect. And in this case, I got at least 2. I have 2 3/4. There's other kids that sometimes need redirecting as well. So I understand that. But once you elope and I can't leave the 9 for the 1 and there's nobody else, I don't know, and there's no BIP, and there's no positive behavior plan. And then when I asked about it, it was silence. Like, did he have one and it's just not in there? Or did they not have this problem? And it wasn't until I saw Miss Cole, who had him last year, she said, yeah, we had the same problem with the medication early on last school year about this time, but Mom fixed that. So this was a problem before. But I didn't know it until later, till Friday, that this was a problem before. Because I said, I finally spoke with Mom. I said I had met her before, but she didn't tell me anything about, because even I had asked about the seizures, like what should I be looking for so I know what to see. The other day he had a headache. I sent him straight to the nurse. The nurse sent him back with ice. I said, but I said, she sent them straight back. I said, so I didn't know if, I was concerned based on what I read that the headache might be a precursor. So I knew to watch out more carefully, I said, is there anything else I should look out for besides the headaches? And mom was telling us. And that's when she explained she took them off the meds and and they didn't have the meds and they had an appointment for. So it's like I could do all the things, but if people are going to pick the negative things out, they're going to find it. It doesn't matter that I'm normally at work before 7, normally about 6:30, or that I stay when other teachers have already gone out the door, or that I go home and I write IEPs and I do all my, I created special folders for the words that they need to know. I mean, I created special things to work on their penmanship. I mean, I created more things, and I try to create relationships with kids separately and, collectively. And basically, it almost felt like me trying to sew his teddy bear became the reason why all of this happened. Because now you're trying to prove that I don't like the kid. And I don't understand that. I understand behaviors have nothing to do with me liking every morning when he comes in. Good morning, Carlos. How's your day? He'll come sit by my desk a few minutes. I ask him a question so I can read him. He goes back to his seat. Friday, he was at my desk first thing in the morning. We had a conversation about what happened, where he had gone somewhere and what his cat did. And then I tried to get him back to his seat, because I had the meeting at 8, so I couldn't, keep talking to him. But, I don't know. I'm just like, yeah, I will sit in this chair for the rest of this afternoon and, I'm keeping my legs propped up, and I will transform this into a transcript, and that'll be it.